Have you ever had someone look at the thing you love most in the world and call it worthless? I have. I was standing in my Aunt Margot's marble-floored living room, surrounded by 40 relatives in cocktail attire, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, while she held up her phone to show everyone the photo of my latest painting, a portrait I'd spent 3 months creating, pouring everything I understood about grief and beauty into oil and canvas. She zoomed in on the brushstrokes with a manicured nail and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "This is what my niece does instead of working. Amateur hour. Honestly, Sienna, when are you going to grow up and get a real job?" The room went quiet in that specific way that means everyone heard, but no one will defend you. Someone coughed. Someone else refilled their drink. And I stood there, 28 years old, feeling exactly like I was 8 again. Small, stupid, wrong for wanting something that didn't fit inside Margot's definition of success. My name is Sienna Thorne, and for most of my life, I believed that art was something you did in the margins of real life, not the center of it. That belief wasn't mine originally, it was installed, carefully and repeatedly, by my Aunt Margot, a woman who measured worth in square footage and profit margins, who'd built a real estate empire before she turned 40 and expected everyone in the family to worship at the altar of her success. I came to live with her when I was 7, after my mother died in a car accident. My father had never been in the picture, and my mother's sister Margot was the logical choice, wealthy, stable, organized, the kind of person who had guest rooms with Egyptian cotton sheets and a housekeeper who came twice a week. On paper, I was lucky. In practice, I was a creative child, being raised by a woman who thought imagination was something you outgrew, like training wheels or a fear of the dark. My mother had been an artist too, a sculptor, actually, who worked with clay and wire, creating these delicate pieces that looked like they might take flight if you breathed on them wrong. I remember her studio, this converted garage that smelled like earth and coffee, where I'd sit on a stool and draw in my sketchbook while she worked. She'd hum while she shaped the clay, completely absorbed, and sometimes she'd look over at my drawings and say, "You've got the eye, baby. You see things the way they feel, not just the way they look." I didn't understand what she meant then. I do now. That ability to see beneath the surface, to translate emotion into image, that was her gift to me, the only inheritance that mattered. When she died, Margot packed up that studio in an afternoon, donated everything to a community center, and told me it was time to focus on practical things now. I was 7. I didn't know how to argue. I just knew something precious had been thrown away while I wasn't looking. Margot wasn't cruel, exactly. She was convinced she was helping. In her worldview, art was a hobby for wealthy people who'd already made their money, or a tragic career choice for people who'd end up broke and bitter. She wanted to save me from that fate. So she enrolled me in business camps, bought me economics textbooks for my birthday, talked endlessly about the family business, Thorne properties, luxury developments, the pride of seeing your name on a building. I tried. God, I tried. I took the AP classes she insisted on, majored in business administration in college, because she threatened to cut off tuition if I didn't. Even worked at one of her properties for 2 years after graduation, managing leases and attending mind-numbing meetings about zoning laws. But the entire time, I was painting. At night, in my tiny apartment, I'd set up an easel by the window and work until 3 a.m., trying to recapture that feeling from my mother's studio, that sense of purpose, of touching something true. The breaking point came when I was 26. I'd been offered a promotion at Thorne Properties, junior vice president, corner office, salary that would have made my college classmates weep with envy, and I turned it down. I told Margot I was quitting to paint full-time, to actually try to make it work. The look on her face was something between horror and disgust, like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "You're throwing your life away," she said. "Do you know how many people would kill for this opportunity? And you're going to waste it on a hobby you're not even good at?" That last part landed like a punch. "You don't know if I'm good or not," I said quietly. "You've never actually looked at my work." She laughed, short and sharp. "I don't need to look, Sienna. I know what successful art looks like. I've been to galleries. I've bought pieces for my properties. And what you do, it's fine, it's nice, but it's not that. It's never going to be that. You're going to end up broke and bitter, and I won't be there to bail you out." But I quit anyway. I moved into an even tinier apartment, one where I could use the living room as a studio. and I painted. I worked part-time at a coffee shop to cover rent. Spent every other waking hour at the easel. I took classes, joined artist collectives, submitted to shows and got rejected, submitted again and got rejected again. Margot stopped inviting me to family dinners. When I did see her holidays, mostly, occasions when my absence would be too pointed, she'd ask how the hobby was going with this pitying smile, then change the subject to talk about her latest development project, making sure everyone at the table understood the contrast between her success and my delusion. My cousins, her kids, had both gone into the business. They were thriving, buying houses, having kids, doing everything right. And then there was me, the cautionary tale, the one who'd chosen passion over pragmatism, and was clearly suffering for it. Except I wasn't suffering. I was learning. I was growing. I was finding my voice. This specific visual language that felt like mine. Portraits, mostly, but not traditional ones. I painted people in moments of transition, capturing that instant when something ends and something else begins. Grief transforming into acceptance. Fear becoming courage. The exact second when you realize you're stronger than you thought. It was my mother's philosophy made visible. Seeing things the way they feel. Some people got it. The art community in my city started recognizing my work, inviting me to group shows, asking me to participate in installations. I sold pieces here and there, nothing that would make me rich, but enough to prove this wasn't just ego or delusion. I was making something that mattered to people, just not to Margot. The family reunion happened in June. One of those elaborate affairs Margot threw every few years to remind everyone of her importance. Garden party at her estate, caterers, string quartet, the whole performance. I almost didn't go, but my cousin Jason, one of the few family members who didn't treat me like a charity case, convinced me. "Come on," he said. "Free food. Open bar. You can leave early. Plus, Margot's been on good behavior lately. Maybe she's mellowing." He was wrong. About an hour into the party, after enough wine to loosen her tongue but not enough to blame the alcohol, Margot cornered me near the rose garden. "So," she said, "still painting?" Her tone made it sound like a disease. "Still at it," I replied evenly. "Actually, I just finished a piece I'm really proud of. It's going to be in a show next month at the Hartley Gallery." The Hartley was a small but respected gallery downtown. Getting included was a real achievement. Margot raised an eyebrow. "The Hartley? That tiny place on Fifth? Sienna, honey, that's not a real gallery. That's a boutique. A gift shop with delusions." I felt my face get hot, but I kept my voice level. "It's a legitimate art space. The curator is well regarded. It's an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" she pressed. "To sell a painting for $500? 1,000, if you're lucky? How long did the piece take you? 3 months? That's what, $3 an hour?" She laughed, and a few relatives nearby glanced over. "You could make more working at McDonald's, and they'd give you health insurance." I should have walked away. I should have smiled, made an excuse, gone home. But something in me snapped. Maybe it was the years of this, the endless dismissal, the way she made my passion sound like a moral failing. "Why do you care so much?" I asked. "Why does it bother you that I'm doing what I love?" She blinked, surprised by the pushback. Then her face hardened. "Because you're wasting your potential. Because you're embarrassing this family. Because when people ask me about you, I have to explain that my niece is a waitress who paints, and they look at me with pity, like I failed you somehow." "There it is," I said quietly. "This isn't about me at all. It's about you. About how my choices reflect on you." "Everything we do reflects on this family," she shot back. "And what you're doing is reflecting poorly. You're 30 years old. 28. 28. Living in poverty. Chasing a dream that isn't going to happen. It's time to wake up, Sienna. It's time to stop pretending you're special." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and final. Around us, conversation had stopped. Everyone was listening now, watching the show. Margot must have realized it, because she suddenly pulled out her phone. "Here," she announced to the growing audience. "Let me show everyone what I mean." She pulled up the photo I'd posted on Instagram the week before, a preview of the painting going to the Hartley show. It was a self-portrait of sorts, a woman standing at a threshold, half her face in shadow, half in light, the exact moment of choosing to walk forward. I'd titled it, Becoming. Margot zoomed in on the canvas, showing the texture of the brushstrokes, the layered colors. "This," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "is what my niece does instead of working. Amateur hour. Honestly, Sienna, when are you going to grow up and get a real job?" The laughter wasn't universal, but it was there. Nervous chuckles, someone's performative agreement. Margot's inner circle, nodding along, feeding the narrative. I looked at her triumphant face, at the phone held up like evidence of my failure, and something crystallized inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. "I'm going to go," I said calmly. "Thanks for the party." I set down my champagne glass and walked out, past the relatives who wouldn't meet my eyes, past the string quartet still gamely playing Vivaldi, past the elaborate life Margot had built to prove to everyone that she mattered. I drove home, climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, and stood in front of Becoming, still drying on the easel. And I made myself a promise. I would never, ever, let someone else's fear define my worth again. Whatever happened next, I would know what I was building was mine. The call came 2 weeks later. I was at the coffee shop, mid-shift, making a particularly complicated oat milk latte for a customer who'd changed her order 3 times, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me step outside and answer. "Is this Sienna Thorne?" a woman's voice asked. Professional, precise, kind. Speaking. "Miss Thorne, my name is Dr. Evelyn Chen. I'm the senior curator at the National Portrait Gallery." I stopped walking. The National Portrait Gallery. One of the most prestigious museums in the country, the kind of place I'd visited on field trips as a kid, where portraits of presidents and poets and pioneers lived behind velvet ropes. "I'm sorry," I said, certain I'd misheard. "The National Portrait Gallery?" "Yes," Dr. Chen said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I attended the opening at the Hartley Gallery last night. I saw your piece, Becoming." "Miss Thorne, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." I sat down on the curb because my legs had stopped working. "You saw my work?" "I did. And I want to acquire it for the museum's permanent collection." The world tilted. Permanent collection. The words didn't make sense in the same sentence as my name. I don't understand. You want to buy my painting?" "That piece, yes, along with 2 others from your portfolio that I reviewed online. I'd like to offer $200,000 for all 3, with the intent of featuring them in our upcoming exhibition on contemporary portraiture. I'd also like to commission you for a larger installation piece for the gallery's main atrium. Are you available to discuss this in person?" I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. $200,000. A museum acquisition. A commission. The exact things Margot had said would never happen. Could never happen. Didn't happen to people like me. "Miss Thorne?" "Doctor." Chen's voice, gentle, slightly concerned. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm here. Yes. Yes, I'd love to discuss this. Thank you. Thank you so much. We scheduled a meeting for the following week." I hung up and sat on that curb for 20 minutes, crying in front of the coffee shop while customers stepped around me, probably assuming I'd just been dumped or fired. But these were different tears. These were the kind that come when something you've protected and nurtured and believed in against all evidence and opposition suddenly gets recognized, gets seen, gets valued by someone who knows what they're looking at. Dr. Chen hadn't seen me as Margot's disappointing niece, or the family embarrassment. She'd seen my work as it was worthy, powerful, museum quality, and she'd backed that vision with 6 figures and a commission that could change my entire career. The meeting was surreal. Dr. Chen's office was filled with art books and photographs from exhibitions, and she talked about my work with the kind of serious analysis usually reserved for dead masters. She saw things in my paintings I'd intended but never articulated: the use of light as transformation, the way I positioned my subjects in doorways and thresholds to suggest movement between states. She understood what I was doing. The contract was straightforward. They'd purchase Becoming and 2 other pieces from my portfolio, a diptych I'd created about inherited trauma called Bloodline. The $200,000 would be split between the acquisitions and the commission. The installation, they wanted something large-scale. Something that addressed the theme of artistic legacy and the courage to create despite opposition. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dr. Chen also mentioned that the museum would be putting out a press release about the acquisition. Standard procedure for living artists entering the permanent collection. Is that all right? She asked. Some artists prefer to keep their sales private. I thought about Margot, about the party, about the phone held up to mock me. Actually, I said, a press release sounds perfect. The release went out 3 days later. I didn't see it immediately. I was in my studio, working on preliminary sketches for the installation, completely absorbed. But apparently, the museum had done a full announcement. Photos of the pieces they'd acquired. A quote from Dr. Chen about my luminous exploration of transformation and resilience, a mention of the installation commission, and my full name, Sienna Thorne, right there in the headline. The art world noticed first. I started getting emails from galleries I'd only dreamed of exhibiting in, requests for interviews, Instagram messages from other artists congratulating me. Then the mainstream picked it up. A local news site ran a story. Local artist makes major museum sale at 28. Someone tagged Margot in the comments, mentioning she was my aunt. That's when things got interesting. My phone started blowing up, but not with calls for me. With texts from relatives. From Jason. Holy shit, Sienna. Did you see the news? Margot is losing her mind. From my cousin Rebecca. Mom just called. She saw the article. She's asking if we knew about this. From numbers I didn't even have saved. People who'd barely spoken to me in years, suddenly wanting to reconnect, to congratulate me, to mention they'd always believed in my talent. I ignored most of them. But then Margot called. I stared at her name on my screen for 4 rings before I answered. Sienna. Her voice was tight, controlled. I saw the announcement. I figured you would, I said calmly. I want to apologize. There was a pause. Several of my friends attended the reunion. They've been calling me since the press release came out. They're asking why I was mocking museum-quality work, why I was publicly humiliating you, when clearly you're... She struggled with the words. Clearly, you're very talented. I let the silence stretch. Let her sit in it. So you're apologizing because you're embarrassed, I said finally. Not because you hurt me. Not because you spent years telling me I was wasting my life. But because your friends are questioning your judgment. That's not fair, she said. But her voice wavered. Isn't it? I asked. You said I was never going to make it. You said my work was amateur. You held up my painting at your party and laughed at it in front of everyone. And now one of the most respected museums in the country has paid $200,000 for that same painting and 2 others. They've commissioned me for a major installation. So either you were wrong then, or they're wrong now. Which is it, Margot? Another pause. Then, quietly, I was wrong. You were, I agreed. But here's the thing. I already knew that. I knew it every time I stood in front of a canvas and felt what I was doing was real and important. Even when you told me it wasn't. I knew it every time someone saw my work and cried, or thanked me, or told me I'd captured something they'd never been able to articulate. Your opinion of my worth stopped mattering the moment I decided to define it myself. So I accept your apology, Margot. But not because I need it. Because you need to say it. You need to acknowledge that you tried to crush something beautiful because you couldn't see its value, and now you have to live with that. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Unsteady. You taught me an important lesson, I continued. Never let someone else define your worth. Not even family. Especially not family. Because the people closest to you can do the most damage if you let them. Thank you for that lesson. It made me stronger. Sienna, she started. But I was done. I have to go. I have work to do. Real work. I hung up. And for the first time in my entire relationship with my aunt, I felt free. Not vindicated, exactly, not triumphant, just free. Free from needing her approval, free from the weight of her disappointment, free from the narrative she'd spent 20 years writing about who I was and what I could become. I was writing my own story now, and she was just a chapter, an important one. A painful one, but not the ending. The installation took 6 months to complete. I called it Despite. and it was the most ambitious thing I'd ever created. A series of 9 large-scale portraits, each showing a different person in the act of creating something, while shadows tried to pull them back. A dancer mid-leap with hands reaching from the darkness. A writer at a desk with faces in the windows mocking them. A child drawing while adults loomed with erasers. And in the center, the largest piece. A woman painting a door onto a wall, walking through it, leaving behind a room full of people saying it's impossible. The figures pulling at her were faceless, universal. They could be anyone: family, friends, society, the voice in your own head. But the woman was walking through anyway, mid-stride, half in the old world and half in the new one she was creating. The installation opened in January, and it was everything I'd hoped. The museum mounted the pieces in the main atrium where natural light flooded in, making the colors practically glow. Dr. Chen gave a speech about the courage to create, about how art requires not just skill but audacity, the willingness to believe in your vision when everyone else calls it worthless. She quoted my mother, something I'd mentioned in passing during one of our meetings. You see things the way they feel, not just the way they look. I stood there listening, surrounded by hundreds of people who'd come to the opening, and I felt my mother's presence like a hand on my shoulder. This is what she'd wanted for me. Not wealth or prestige or museum shows necessarily, but this, the full expression of my vision, uncompromised and undimmed. Margot didn't come to the opening. I didn't invite her, and she didn't ask. But I heard from Jason that she'd visited the museum a week later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and stood in front of Despite for over an hour. He'd heard this from one of her friends who'd been there, who'd watched Margot stare at the central figure, the woman walking through the impossible door, and realized she was crying. I don't know what she was thinking in that moment. Regret, maybe. Or recognition of what she'd almost destroyed. Or perhaps just the shock of seeing clearly, finally, what I'd been trying to show her all along. That value isn't determined by profit margins or social acceptance or someone else's narrow definition of success. Value is intrinsic. It's in the thing itself, in the act of creation, in the courage to believe in something invisible and make it real. The museum acquisition launched my career in ways I couldn't have predicted. Galleries in New York, London, Berlin started reaching out. I was invited to residencies, commissioned for public works, interviewed for art magazines. 2 years after Despite opened, I had a solo show at a gallery in Manhattan that sold out in the first week. Forbes ran a profile calling me one of the most exciting new voices in contemporary portraiture. My work was suddenly worth ridiculous amounts. Pieces that had sat unsold in group shows for years were being resold at auction for 10 times their original price. The art market is strange that way, self-fulfilling and momentum-driven. But I tried not to let it change what I was doing, how I was working. I was still painting people in thresholds, still exploring that instant of transformation, still trying to capture what my mother taught me, the feeling beneath the looking. I donated $100,000 from the museum sale to arts education programs for underprivileged kids. Set up a scholarship fund specifically for young artists from low-income families. The kind who'd otherwise be told that art is a luxury they can't afford. A hobby, not a career. I called it the Elena Thorne Scholarship, after my mother. Every year, we give 5 full-ride scholarships to art schools, no strings attached, just belief and investment in their vision. I meet the recipients when I can. Tell them about my mother's studio, about learning to see the way things feel. Tell them about Margot too, because I think it's important. I tell them that someone will always say you're not good enough, that your dreams are worthless, that you should be practical and safe and small. And that voice might even come from people who love you, who think they're protecting you. But you have to learn to hear past it, to trust the quiet voice underneath that says, this matters, this is real, this is mine. I saw Margot one more time, about 3 years after the museum acquisition. I was in town for a panel discussion at the university, and she reached out, asking if we could have coffee. I almost said no. The wound had scarred over by then, and I wasn't sure I wanted to reopen it. But curiosity got the better of me, or maybe just a sense that there was one more conversation we needed to have to truly close that chapter. We met at a cafe downtown, neutral territory. She looked older, smaller somehow, though maybe I was just seeing her differently. Thank you for meeting me, she said. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. She nodded, stirred her coffee, seemed to gather herself. "I've been in therapy," she said abruptly. "Since the reunion. Since everything that happened. Working through a lot of things. Control issues. Fear of failure. The need to have everyone in the family succeed in the exact same way I did. Because if you succeeded differently, it meant my way wasn't the only valid path, and that terrified me." I listened, not offering anything yet. "I projected all of that onto you," she continued. "Your mother, my sister, she and I were so different. She was creative and free and didn't care about stability, and it made me crazy because I'd built my entire identity on being the responsible one, the successful one, the one who did everything right. When she died and you came to live with me, I saw her in you. That same creative impulse, that same disregard for practical concerns, and I was determined to save you from what I saw as her mistakes. From ending up," she paused, "from ending up poor and struggling like she was." "My mother wasn't poor," I said quietly. "She wasn't rich, but she wasn't poor. She had enough. She had her work, which she loved. She had me. She was happy. Margot, you saw her life as a cautionary tale. But it wasn't. It was just a different kind of success than yours." Margot's eyes filled with tears. "I know that now. I'm starting to understand it. But at the time, all I could see was risk and instability, and I was so afraid you'd end up hurt, or desperate, or successful in a way that proved you wrong about everything," I suggested. She flinched but nodded. "Yes, that too. And when you are, it forced me to re-examine a lot of things. About value, about success, about what it means to live a good life. I don't have answers yet, but I wanted you to know I'm trying. And I'm sorry, truly sorry, not because I'm embarrassed, but because I hurt you. Because I tried to shrink you when I should have been celebrating you. You deserved better. You deserved an aunt who saw what you were building and supported it, even if she didn't understand it." I sat with that for a moment. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the hurt as proof of what I'd overcome. But the larger part, the part that had been shaped by years of painting transformation, of capturing people in the act of becoming something new, recognized that Margot was trying to walk through her own impossible door. And that took courage too, just a different kind. "I forgive you," I said finally. "But I want you to understand something. Your approval doesn't change what my work is worth. Your criticism didn't diminish it, and your praise doesn't elevate it. It exists independently of your opinion. That's what I've learned. That's what I want you to learn. Value is intrinsic, and the sooner you understand that about art, about people, about life, the freer you'll be." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "You're wiser than I ever gave you credit for." "I had a good teacher," I said. "My mother. She taught me to see past the surface. I think she'd be proud that I finally learned the lesson." We finished our coffee, talked a little about safer things, the family, her business, my upcoming shows. It wasn't a full reconciliation, and maybe it never would be. But it was closure, the kind that lets you move forward without dragging the past behind you like chains. Here's what I want you to understand. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told your passion is worthless, your dream is foolish, your art is just a hobby, they're wrong. Not because everyone who pursues art will end up in museums or make six figures or achieve recognition. Success is more complex than that, more personal. They're wrong because worth isn't determined by commercial viability or someone else's ability to see it. Worth is in the act of creation itself, in the discipline of showing up to the work, in the courage to make something vulnerable and true, and put it out into a world that might reject it. Every time you choose to create despite the voices telling you not to, you're already successful. You're already winning. The museum acquisition, the money, the career, those are beautiful, and I'm grateful for them. But they're not what made my work valuable. My work was valuable when I was painting at 3 a.m. in a tiny apartment, when only 3 people saw it, when I was selling pieces for $500 that barely covered supplies. It was valuable because it was true to my vision, because it expressed something I needed to say, because it connected with people who needed to see it. Margot called my art a worthless hobby because she genuinely couldn't see its value. And that's the trap, isn't it? We let other people's blindness make us doubt our own vision. We let their inability to see become evidence of our inadequacy. But here's the secret. Some people will never see it. Not because the work isn't good, but because they're looking at it through the wrong lens, measuring it against the wrong standards, comparing it to something it was never trying to be. Margot was looking at my paintings and seeing real estate transactional value, market metrics, return on investment. She couldn't see the transformation, the emotion, the truth captured in oil and canvas, because those things don't show up on balance sheets. But Dr. Chen could see it. The people who bought my work could see it. You, listening to this, might be able to see it in your own creations, whatever form they take, and that's all that matters. Finding the people who see what you see, who value what you value, who understand what you're building. So if someone in your life is calling your passion worthless, if they're pressuring you to give up what you love for what's practical, if they're holding up your work and mocking it at parties, actual or metaphorical, here's what I want you to remember. Their fear is not your compass. Their limitations are not your boundaries. Their inability to imagine a path doesn't mean the path doesn't exist. Keep creating. Keep building. Keep walking toward the impossible door and painting it into reality as you go. Because here's what I've learned, the people who tell you your dreams are worthless are usually people who gave up on their own dreams or never had the courage to try in the first place. And they can't stand watching you do what they couldn't, be what they weren't, believe in what they long ago decided was impossible. Your success, your persistence, your audacity to keep creating despite them. It's a mirror that shows them their own abandoned possibilities, and that's unbearable. So they try to stop you. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something that exposes everything they're not doing. But here's the beautiful part. You don't have to convince them. You don't have to prove anything to them. You just have to keep doing the work, day after day, even when no one's watching, even when there's no applause or validation or museum check. You have to become so rooted in your own sense of purpose that external opinions, positive or negative, can't shake you. That's what my mother gave me, though I didn't understand it until years after she was gone. She taught me that creation is its own reward, that the act of making something true is enough, whether anyone else ever sees it or not. And once you internalize that, once you build your sense of worth from the inside out instead of accepting it from the outside in, you become unstoppable. Not because nothing can hurt you, rejection still stings, criticism still lands, failure still teaches hard lessons, but because your foundation is unshakable, your worth isn't up for debate. Your value isn't dependent on someone else's approval. The museum curator who bought my work for $200,000 didn't make me a real artist. I was already a real artist, had been since I was 7 years old, drawing in my mother's studio, feeling that pull toward creation that has nothing to do with profit or prestige, and everything to do with calling. What Dr. Chen did was recognize what was already there, give it a platform, connect it with people who were ready to see it. And that's what I try to do now with the scholarship fund, with the mentoring programs I'm part of. With every talk I give to young artists, I try to be the person who sees what they're building and says, yes, that's real, that matters, keep going. Because I remember what it felt like to have everyone around me saying, no, that's worthless, that's foolish, grow up. And I remember how close I came to believing them. If I'd listened to Margot, if I'd let her definition of success overwrite mine, I'd be working at Thorn Properties right now, making good money, living a perfectly respectable life, and dying a little bit inside every single day. And that's not dramatic. That's just true. There are 1,000 ways to die before you stop breathing, and one of them is abandoning the thing that makes you feel alive. So here's my question for you. What's your impossible door? What's the thing you're painting onto the wall while everyone tells you walls are solid? That's not how reality works. Stop being ridiculous. What's the dream you're protecting? The passion you're feeding in secret? The vision you're building brick by brick even though no one believes it's going to stand? And more importantly, are you going to keep building it? Are you going to walk through it when it's ready, even if you have to go alone? Because I can tell you from experience, from standing on the other side now looking back, it's worth it. Every struggle, every doubt, every moment of wondering if you're crazy or delusional or wasting your time worth it. The day you stand in front of your creation and know it's real, know it's yours, know it's exactly what you intended it to be that day, redeems everything that came before. That day, you understand what your life is for. I'm Sienna Thorne, painter, daughter of Elena who taught me to see past surfaces, niece of Margot who taught me that other people's blindness is their problem, not mine. I spent years being told my art was a worthless hobby, and then a museum paid $200,000 for 3 pieces, and commissioned me to create something that would live in their building forever, that would be seen by hundreds of thousands of people, that would outlive me and carry my vision into a future I'll never see. But even if that hadn't happened, even if I were still in the tiny apartment selling work for $500 at small gallery shows, I'd still be an artist. Because art isn't something you do after you've proven yourself. It's something you do to prove to yourself that you're alive, that you're paying attention, that you're using your eyes and hands and heart to translate the invisible into the visible. And that's never worthless. Not when you're doing it in secret, not when no one's watching, not when everyone's laughing. It's only worthless if you let someone else's opinion stop you from doing it at all. So keep painting, writing, dancing, building, creating whatever your particular impossible door looks like. Keep walking toward it, even when people tell you walls are solid. Keep proving through your actions, not your arguments, that value is intrinsic, and vision is self-validating. And when someone calls what you love a worthless hobby, smile, and think about the museum curator, the gallery owner, the stranger who'll one day see what you've made and understand exactly what you meant, exactly what you were trying to say. Those people are out there. Your work will find them, or they'll find your work. Either way, the connection will happen if you don't give up before it does. That's the only real failure, stopping before the story's finished, accepting someone else's ending instead of writing your own. Don't do that. Don't let them dim your light. Don't let their fear become your ceiling. Paint the door, walk through it, and let them stand on the other side wondering how you did the impossible. You'll know the truth. It was never impossible. They just couldn't see it yet. But you could, and that made all the difference.